It was a typical afternoon in the park, children playing on swings, joggers passing by, and the sun casting a warm glow over everything. But something felt different today. The usual serenity was tainted by the sound of teenage laughter cutting through the air, sharp and mocking. A group of boys, no older than 16, strolled through the park, their eyes scanning for an easy target. They stopped when they saw him, an elderly man sitting on a worn-out bench, his back slightly hunched, his face withered by years of life. His clothes were simple, nothing that would catch the eye, and yet, to these boys, he seemed the perfect victim. They approached, their laughter growing louder, the taunting words slipping from their mouths like a sickness. "What's an old man doing out here all alone?" one of them sneered. Another chimed in, "Bet he has nothing better to do than sit around like a statue." Their voices held no remorse, only mockery. Yet, the elderly man didn't flinch. He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge their existence. He remained seated, a silent figure in the middle of their laughter, as if untouched by their words. His composure was almost unnerving. It was as though he knew something they didn't, or perhaps, something they couldn't understand. The group of boys walked with the kind of swagger that comes with knowing they were untouchable. Jack, the leader of the pack, strode ahead with an arrogant smile plastered across his face. His confidence was unmatched, and his every word was sharp, meant to provoke. He looked at the elderly man, Kane, with the sort of disdain that suggested he thought the world owed him something. Jack was always looking for trouble, and today was no different. Next to him was Alex, the most impressionable of the bunch. He kept glancing nervously at the others, trying to keep up with Jack's boldness, but there was a hesitation in his step, a feeling he wasn't entirely sure about this. Chris walked beside him, quiet and detached, his eyes often drifting away from the group, but never truly speaking up. He was the type who followed the crowd but stayed in the background, rarely making a fuss unless it was absolutely necessary. David, the last in the group, lagged slightly behind, his expression distant. He wasn't as eager to engage in the teasing as the others, and there was a twinge of regret on his face. The mockery, the cruelty, it didn't sit right with him, but he didn't know how to stop it. And then there was Kane, the elderly man they had targeted. Dressed simply in worn clothes, his gray hair framed his calm face as he sat alone, absorbed in a book. His presence, unassuming yet steady, contrasted sharply with the boys' noisy energy. They saw him as nothing more than an easy target, weak, defenseless. But Kane was far from what they imagined. The boys circled Kane like vultures, their laughter ringing out in the otherwise quiet park. The air shifted as they closed in on him, sensing an opportunity to have some fun at his expense. Jack, with his usual bravado, stepped forward first, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "What are you reading, old man?" Jack sneered, his voice laced with mockery. "Bet you can't even walk straight, can you?" He flashed a crooked grin, waiting for a reaction, expecting Kane to crumble under the pressure. Kane, however, didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the pages of his book, his hand steady as he turned the pages. The silence was deafening, and the boys were growing increasingly agitated. They had never encountered someone who didn't react to their taunts. The more Kane remained composed, the more furious they became. Alex smirked nervously, but his eyes flicked to Jack, looking for approval. Chris shuffled his feet, his discomfort palpable. But David, the quiet one, stood frozen, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. Jack, sensing his control slipping, pushed harder. "What's the matter, old man? Too scared to answer? You're nothing but an easy target." His words were sharp, aimed to cut deep. Suddenly, one of the boys, Chris, took a step forward, fists clenched. He wanted to prove something, to show his dominance. His body tensed, and the boys' laughter grew louder, ready to escalate the situation into something more violent. Kane's calmness had triggered something in them, a desire to break him. Just as Chris lunged forward, ready to strike, something unimaginable happened. Kane's calm exterior cracked like a storm breaking through the sky. In an instant, his hand shot out, faster than any of them could have predicted. With a vice-like grip, Kane seized Chris's wrist, locking it in place with an overwhelming strength that made the young boy freeze in his tracks. His breath caught in his throat as his body tensed, unable to break free. The boys stood motionless, their minds racing to process what had just happened. For a moment, the park was eerily silent, the sounds of the world around them fading into nothing. The laughter, the taunts, everything stopped. The grip Kane had on Chris was unyielding, but his expression remained unchanged, almost serene. As Chris struggled, trying to pull away, the tension in the air was palpable. Then, from behind, an elderly man stepped forward. He was walking with a cane, his eyes sharp and focused as he observed the scene. The boys hadn't noticed him until now, but his presence felt almost commanding. "This is Kane," the old man said, his voice steady but with a weight of recognition. "A master martial artist, one of the best. A former karate champion." The words hit the boys like a slap to the face. They stared at Kane, their arrogance shattering like glass. This wasn't just some frail, defenseless old man. This was a force they had recklessly provoked, and now they were in over their heads. The reality of their mistake hit them all at once. They had picked the wrong target. Kane's grip on Chris's wrist loosened slightly, but he didn't let go completely. He stood tall, unshaken, as the group of boys stood in front of him, their defiant postures now replaced with uncertainty. Kane's voice broke the silence, smooth but carrying the weight of years of wisdom. "Strength isn't about hurting others," he said, his eyes locking with each of theirs. His voice, though calm, had an undeniable authority that made them listen. True strength comes from knowing when not to use it. It's about protecting, guiding, and teaching, not hurting for the sake of it. The boys didn't respond. They simply stood there, still and uncomfortable. Kane's eyes softened, his grip now fully released as he took a step back, giving them space. He continued, his words filling the air with a truth that seemed to weigh heavy on their hearts. "People often act out of ignorance and prejudice," Kane explained, his gaze steady. "They don't understand the pain they cause because they never take the time to see things from another's perspective." The park was eerily quiet now, the boys' previous arrogance giving way to a deep, unsettling silence. They had never heard someone speak with such quiet power, a power not born from brute force, but from understanding. Kane looked at them one last time, his eyes penetrating their souls as he spoke his final warning. "If you continue with hate in your heart," Kane said firmly, "it will destroy you. Not the people you harm, but yourself." The boys stood frozen, the gravity of his words sinking in. They were humbled, their bravado gone, replaced by a growing sense of regret. The world around them felt different now, the truth of Kane's lesson taking root deep within their minds. The once boisterous group stood in silence, their earlier bravado now replaced by a heavy sense of guilt. The air, which had once been filled with mockery, was now thick with regret. The boys exchanged uneasy glances, each feeling the weight of their actions. Jack, the leader of the group, was the first to speak. His voice was quieter now, lacking its usual arrogance. "We didn't know," he mumbled, his words coming slowly as if they were hard to find. "We're sorry." Kane, who had been standing stoically, nodded, his expression softening. "The thing about life is," he began, his tone calm yet full of wisdom, "you can't always know everything. But you can choose how to treat others." The boy stood there, absorbing his words. The truth of what Kane had said was starting to sink in, and it wasn't easy to accept. But in that moment, they knew he was right. The old man who had recognized Kane stepped forward again, adding his own voice to the moment. "You boys have no idea how lucky you are that he didn't react the way you thought," he said, shaking his head. "You have no idea how much pain you could have caused, but Kane chose to teach you instead." The boys stood, humbled, as the truth of their actions became clearer with each passing second. They had let their prejudices guide them, blinded by arrogance, but now they were beginning to understand. Empathy, respect, and kindness were the true strengths they needed to cultivate. The moment was profound, and they knew they had learned something far greater than they had expected. The boys slowly turned and walked away, their steps heavier than when they had first arrived. The cocky swagger that had once defined their every movement was now gone, replaced by a quiet humility. They had been humbled, not by force, but by a lesson far more powerful than any punch or shove. They walked in silence, each of them reflecting on the words Cain had shared, understanding that they had just witnessed something life-changing. Cain, on the other hand, simply returned to his book. His demeanor remained calm, peaceful, and unaffected by the confrontation. As he opened the pages once again, the warm golden glow of the setting sun bathed the park, signaling the end of the day. But for the boys, the lesson they had learned from Cain would last far longer than the fleeting hours of sunlight. Cain hadn't needed to fight or raise his voice. His silence, his strength of character, and the wisdom in his words had done all the work. He had shown them that real power lies in restraint, understanding, and kindness. The park grew quieter as the boys disappeared from view, and though the moment had passed, Cain's lesson lingered in the air. It was a lesson the boys would carry with them for the rest of their lives, a reminder that true strength comes not from domination, but from empathy and respect for others. 4 weeks had passed since that life-changing encounter in the park. The boys returned, but this time, there was a noticeable shift in their demeanor. Gone was the arrogance, the cocky attitude that had once defined them. In its place was a newfound humility, and with it, a deeper understanding of the world around them. They walked toward the same bench where Cain had sat before. He was there, as calm and peaceful as ever, his book resting in his lap. This time, the boys didn't approach him with mockery. Instead, they walked up humbly, their heads lowered slightly in respect. "We're sorry for how we acted before," Jack said, the words sincere. The others nodded in agreement. Cain looked at them, his eyes softening as he recognized the change in their attitudes. "You've learned something," Cain remarked, a quiet pride in his voice. The boys asked him, with genuine curiosity, if he could show them a few martial arts moves. It wasn't about showing off or proving anything. They wanted to learn. Cain smiled and agreed. He demonstrated a few simple movements, emphasizing the importance of control, discipline, and understanding, lessons that transcended the physical. The boys watched closely, absorbing every word. As they thanked Cain and walked away, they felt different, changed for the better. And Cain, once again, returned to his peaceful life, knowing that his lesson had truly made a difference. Cain's impact on the boys was profound, leaving a lasting mark that would shape their lives from that day forward. As they walked away, their heads held high but with newfound respect for themselves and others, they understood the true meaning of strength. It wasn't in physical power, but in kindness, humility, and the willingness to learn. The boys had learned that real strength comes from within, from how you treat others and how you grow from your mistakes. Their arrogance had been replaced with empathy, and they now saw the world through a different lens. Cain, once again, returned to his peaceful life, a small smile on his face. He knew his lesson had been learned, not just for the moment, but for a lifetime. The boys would never forget what he had taught them, and that, for Cain, was enough.